Hello, this is Wendy Lightheart, and for this lesson we are going to review two different methods for solving percent problems. We will first review how to solve a percent problem using a percent equation. Then we will review the proportion method for solving percent problems. To solve a percent problem using a percent equation, we start by translating the percent question into equation form. To do this, we need to know how to translate each number, word, or phrase into a number, operation symbol, variable, or an equal sign. For example, the word of will translate into a multiplication symbol, which remember is a dot in algebra. The word is translates to an equal sign. The word what, or the phrase what percent, translates to a variable, since it's referring to the unknown value we're trying to find. Note for this method, percents must always be converted to decimal form before it is placed into the equation. For our first example, we're just going to practice translating. We want to know what is 19% of 82. So let's translate each piece using the translations we just learned. Remember that the word what refers to the unknown value we're trying to find, so we translate that word to a variable, say x. Next is the word is, which remember translates to an equal sign. The 19% must be converted to decimal form before we place it into the equation. So it becomes 0.19. We translate the word of to a multiplication symbol. And then since 82 is not a percent, we keep it in its current form. This is the process of translating the percent question into an equation. Now let's use this process to answer a percent question by again translating it into an equation and then taking it one step further by solving the resulting equation. We want to know what is 8% of 34. To answer this question, we first translate it into an equation. What becomes x, is becomes an equal sign, 8% becomes 0.08 since it must first be converted to decimal form, of becomes a multiplication sign, and 34 stays unchanged since it is not a percent number. Now we solve this for x to answer the question. Thus 2.72 is 8% of 34. Note that this one was pretty easy to solve since the x was already isolated. Let's look at a couple more that will require a bit more work. For this example, the question is, 15 is 16% of what? We start by translating. And note that the x is not isolated in this equation. It is being multiplied by 0.16. So to solve, we can divide both sides by 0.16. Thus, 15 is 16% of 93.75. Let's use this method to solve one more. For this example, we're being asked the question, 27 is what percent of 36? we start by translating to an equation. Notice that I use p instead of x as my variable. I tend to use p whenever the percent is the unknown, and I'll explain why in a second. Now we solve for p by dividing both sides by 36. Performing the division, we obtain 0.75 for p. Now remember that p represents a percent, and the percent is always in decimal form in our equation. This is why I tend to use p whenever it's the percent I'm trying to find. It helps remind me that I will have one more step after solving the equation, and that is to convert that decimal form into percent form. Thus we find that 27 is 75% of 36. Now let's look at the proportion method for solving percent problems. A proportion is an equation that states that one ratio is equal to another ratio. A proportion that is used to solve a percent problem is set up a particular way. We translate a percent question into a proportion as follows. The percent number will always go on the top on one side. The number 100 will always go under the percent number. On the other side, we put the amount on top and the base on the bottom. One way to remember this is that the base always goes in the basement. Note that in the percent question, the base will always follow the word of. Thus, whatever follows the word of in the percent question will go on the bottom of the ratio or in the basement on that side. Let's look at a few examples. For this first one, we want to answer the percent question. 15% of 7 is what? For this one, we're only going to translate the question into proportion, which we do by putting the percent number on top over 100. Then notice that the 7 follows the word of in the percent question, which means it is the base and goes on the bottom. The only thing left is the amount, which is what we're trying to find. So we put a variable on the top. An important thing to note is that when using this method, we do not convert the percent number to decimal form. This also means if we're finding the percent number, our solution to the equation will already be in percent form. So we'd simply stick a percent sign on the answer and we're done. Now let's use this method to solve some percent problems. For this one, the percent question asks 35% of what is 21? We start by translating to a proportion. Notice that the word what follows the word of, so we will use a variable to represent the base and put that variable in the bottom. Next, we have to solve this proportion to answer the question. Recall that we solve proportions by cross-multiplying and setting those cross products equal to each other. Thus we have 35 times x, which is one of the cross products, is equal to 21 times 100, which is the other cross product. Simplifying and solving by dividing both sides by 35 to isolate x, we obtain our solution of x equals 60. Thus 35% of 60 is 21. In this last example, we're asked the question, 22 is what percent of 50? We start by translating this into a proportion. We set the cross products equal to each other. And then simplify both sides and solve by dividing both sides by 50. This gives a solution of p equals 44. I used p for the variable to remind myself that p represents a percent. So my answer isn't just 44, it's 44%. Thus, 22 is 44% of 50. Note that you can use either of these methods to solve a percent problem. It's your choice. Just make sure that whichever method you decide to use, you know how to use the method correctly. And don't forget to show all your steps.